Everybody, my name is Alan. On behalf of the crew, I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Bridging Heaven and Earth. You know, I was driving over here, as I normally do, to the studio, and, thinking, what the show is going to be and who the guests are, and, what the meaning of, again, of the show is. And of course, it's always about that love. It's always about the connection between us all. And so much of what prevents us from having the experience of that love and that connection is the fact that we think we know so much about the way everything fits together. And as I've said so many times before, interestingly enough, the whole experiment, if you look at it in a certain way, is that we're hurtling through space on a ball, all of us, from the richest of us to the poorest of us, to the blackest, to the whitest, to the yellow, to the green, to the young, to the old. We're all hurtling through space at just enormous speeds. And yet we think we know how everything fits together. We think we know all the different parts. And because we think we know, and because we use those knowings as separations, we never get to experience the truth of it. And the amazing thing tonight, when I was thinking about the guests, was how they went along in their lives, and they had certain walls and barriers up, and they had certain identities and certain consciousness that I'm this kind of person, I'm a scientist, I'm an anthropologist, I'm a chiropractor, I'm a musician, I'm all these kinds of things. And then something happens in their lives. Something mystically, something amazingly, something spontaneously explodes. And that knowing just opens. And then it opens again, and then it opens again. And isn't that what we want? To open into that love, to open more into that experience of the truth, of that connection between us all, so we really do realize we're all brothers and sisters. So we do really realize that we're all made of that same love, that truth between us is what we're all about. And tonight's guests, since they've had that explosion in their lives, that is their destiny and that is their goal, to go out and to share that explosion, to share that love. We have Hank Wesselman with us. He's an anthropologist still, but something happened to him in Hawaii, where a spiritual awakening happened, that a spontaneous visionary encounter, just an openness, an explosion of consciousness, an explosion of something different happened in his life. And not that he's not an anthropologist anymore, not that he's not a scientist anymore, but something happened to expand that awareness. And he's written 3 extraordinary books, Spiritwalker, Medicinemaker, and the new one that he's just came out with, Visionseeker. And they're all about that explosiveness, that love that connects us all. And that's, again, what his life is dedicated to. And we're just honored to have Hank come. He's so busy now and he's so in demand, but he came to share that love. And that's really what he does. He just goes to share that love and to share that experience of the breaking down of the walls, the unpeeling of the onion, that way to know more. And that's, again, what Bridging Heaven and Earth is about. And we have Salo, Stanley, who was a practicing chiropractor. And then she had a spiritual awakening in Sedona in 1995. And all of a sudden she realized the gift of the Native American flute. And for someone who had not really played music, all of a sudden she knew how to play this flute to an extraordinary extent. Now there are reasons, past lives, whatever. But this happened in a life that she was working, busy. And then this awakening happened. And now her life is dedicated to sharing that awakening. And with her, playing with her, and she did a new CD, is Mark Shuklian, who's been a professional percussionist for 33 years. And he and Salo have put together this incredible CD, Walk in Between Worlds, that is just enlivens that spirit, enlivens that knowing, enlivens that connectedness. So once again, we could all come together and know that truth. So again, the next 57 or so minutes is an opportunity for us all to explode some more, to explode into a knowing of what we truly are, which is all the same love. So again, join me in a short meditation, and then we'll start with Salo and Mark, and then Hank will be with us to talk about his love. So please join me in a short meditation. Thank you. So we're going to start tonight's show with Salo and Mark doing Awakening and Thunder Song, and it's both from their CD. Okay, so whenever they're ready. Wow, thank you, Salo. Thank you, Mark. That was fantastic. So we're on the set with Hank. Welcome.
Thank you, Alan.
So tell me when you exploded. How'd that work for you?
Boy, how did I explode? This is an interesting story because it really begins when I was doing science out in Africa back in the early 1970s when I was a graduate student out of UC Berkeley. I would find myself living in a safari camp for 3 months in the desert, 600 miles from the nearest cold beer or hot bath. And
good thing it wasn't the opposite.
Really. And it was out there in the desert that I began to have what could broadly be called visionary experiences. Now, at that time, I had no idea what these were. You know,
in the 70s. So you hadn't been reading, was Carlos Castaneda books out yet, or Be Here Now, or?
I have to confess, I resisted reading his books for years.
Until you actually started having the experiences, then you started writing them.
That's it. Well, in those days, you know, you didn't share this kind of stuff with your colleagues. I mean, I was out there working with the Leakey family, guys like Don Johansson, F. Clark Howell, Tim White, you know, the guys.
Really?
And so I just put a bookmark in these experiences, and I kept it to myself. But many years later, when I was finishing my work in Berkeley, one morning at dawn, on the heels of a joyous marital encounter, I was suddenly precipitated into a visionary state of consciousness in which I was brought face to face with what traditional tribal people would call a spirit. Now, nothing in my training at Berkeley prepared me for this experience.
This wasn't in the textbooks.
No. In fact, you know, I tried to talk to my colleagues about this, and, you know, they responded with humor. They said, hey, Hank, you know, it's really nice to know that somebody inhaled during the 60s.
Right.
Right.
As our president did.
Right. So,
and of course, neither you nor I did. No.
Neither.
Right.
No. So, you know, I learned to keep this to myself among my colleagues. And I did, until I moved to Hawaii. Now, in 1985...
So you left Berkeley, and now we're living in Hawaii.
I was finished.
Right.
I was teaching for the University of Hawaii on the west side of the Big Island. And I was living with my family on a small farm in the Kona coffee growing area. And one morning, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I had one of these encounters in which my body, my physical body, felt like it was being invaded by a vibrational force or power, which could have been very disturbing if it wasn't so exquisitely pleasurable.
Yeah, that makes it easier. Thank God for that, right?
You know, I was vibrating with this tremendous force, this tremendous power. The thought did cross my mind that what Obi-Wan Kenobi said was true, you know, that the force was real.
Right.
Well, in this state, I began to see these points of light, these visual hallucinations, this grid which extended out across the bedroom, out the window, and then suddenly the house was gone. And I found myself being drawn out through this spider web-like grid or net. And I blacked out. I suddenly blacked out. And when my conscious awareness clicked on once again, I was in somebody else's body. Now, there's a side of Hank the scientist that still steps back when I say that to people because it sounds flaky. But in fact, that's a very good way of describing what I was experiencing. I was in another man's body, and he seemed completely unaware of the fact that I was there. I was looking through his eyes at his world. I discovered I could tap into his thoughts, into his emotions, into his memories, and I began to pick up information about who this guy was, where he was, when he lived. And to my really vast astonishment, I discovered that this guy was a Hawaiian. That wasn't so surprising because I was living in Hawaii. But he lives approximately 247 generations after the collapse of what they call the Great Age. Now,
so that's a few years from now.
That's a few years from now. It's roughly 5,000 years after the collapse of everything that we take so much for granted. Now, to say I was surprised by this experience would be an understatement of vast proportions. I was stunned. I mean, I was literally stunned.
Right.
I was merged with this man for about 18 hours of his time. And suddenly, like changing channels on a TV, I was back in my body, back next to my wife in bed in Kona. This threw me into a crisis. Because at that time, I didn't really know what was happening to me. I thought I might be losing my marbles. I thought I might have organic brain disease. I had myself tested out, and I was fine. I began to write this stuff up like I do field work because I thought it was absolutely extraordinary.
Had you read the Carlos Castaneda books by then?
I'd looked them over by this time.
Right,
And
I was going to say that might have been a little...
We see, I knew that in tribal societies there are individuals known as shamans. Shamans, you know, when we use the word shaman in the West, most of us tend to visualize a masked and costumed tribal person dancing around a fire in the dark, involved in some mysterious ritual accompanied by drum beats.
Right.
Right? Well, inside that cultural shell of mask and costume and ritual, there's an individual with a very real set of skills. All true shamans learn how to induce expanded states of awareness within themselves, in which they typically dissociate their conscious awareness away from their physical body and into an alternate reality that they call the spirit world. They call it the spirit world because of the people they meet there. These entities, spirits of the dead, spirits of animals, spirits of plants, high guardians, angelic forces, and so forth and so on. This is where you encounter them. So I knew that these people existed. I resisted the pathologizing of my experiences that the psychological profession
It is
offered me.
amazing. I mean, the experience is so strong, but
So
mind and just habit is so much. It's so strong too.
Right.
I mean, it's an amazing battle here on Earth. You know, that's like,
Right.
It's not darkness and light. It's just almost habit and solidity versus light and air, kind of.
Very much so.
Yeah,
Well, I
it's
was
interesting
perceiving
how-
through my own cultural lens as a
exactly.
scientist.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I wrote all this stuff up, and no sooner did I get this one written up when I had another one. Then I had another one, and another one.
And they were getting closer in human time.
They were. And in these mergings
And
with
always
this
with
man,
the same, merging with the same
This man
person.
named Nainoa.
No, right.
always with the same man, about the fourth or fifth time it happened, he has a dream. It's very interesting to be merged with somebody when they go to
That's
sleep
true,
and they
right.
dream, because you go to sleep and you dream with them. He has a
But
dream.
you're still separate in a way.
I'm still observing.
Observing, right, yeah.
He has a dream in which he experienced being in another man's body, living on the island of Hawaii sometime in the mythic past. Guess who?
This was something you're not going to tell your colleagues about. I
No,
know.
no.
This is not.
No.
Colleagues, I have something to share with you today.
No,
Not at this university, you know.
What was really interesting was that his first hit was that I must be one of his ancestors. Now, if I'm the ancestor and he's the descendant, this throws this relationship into a whole new venue.
Time and space.
Time
no
and
less,
space.
no less this relationship.
Really? Well, by this time I was aware of the fact that the energy body exists.
Right.
And so if part of his energy body is derived from my energy body, you see, it gives a way of understanding how the connection is being made. Well, over a 4-year period, I had 12 of these episodes. When I returned to California to teach at UC San Diego for a year, I wrote this stuff up as fiction, and it didn't work.
Oh.
I was very fortunate 2 years later to cross trails with a traditional Hawaiian kahuna who listened to my story. She looked at me and said, "You know, Dr. Hank, you may not understand why you've had these experiences, but it's very tempting to say you were given them for a reason." She said, "Look, you're not some new age woo-woo from the marketplace." She said, "You have got credentials,
you're right,
degree,
right.
so forth and so
I
on."
mean, you have somebody, you know, somebody might actually listen to you.
Yes.
Right, I mean, it's weird that way, that it's just
Very.
the experience, but you could put doctor after it, or, you know, some that you teach at all these universities, and it has a certain weight
It
in our
does.
limited way of looking at things.
It translates as validation,
Right,
big time.
right.
So she said, your job is to write these up as they really happened, as nonfiction.
But that's more threatening to you.
Well, I was putting myself right on the chopping block.
And you knew it was threatening. I mean, do you think that's why you didn't do it in the original case? I mean, you kind of knew it was the right thing to do. You say, I'm going to write this as fiction.
You know, there was a time when I thought I could salvage my reputation.
Right,
But, you know,
I know what you mean. I also have given it up well long ago.
you know,
Right.
I eventually let go of that,
Right.
and so the rest is history.
History, right.
The first book was published as Spiritwalker by Bantam. The second book is Medicinemaker by Bantam, and the third book, Visionseeker, is with Hay House. And they're really a trilogy of some extraordinary things that happened to a real scientist doing real science.
And like a regular person. I mean,
A
not
regular person.
right. I mean, which is, it's amazing because it's not, you know, somebody from the Sonora Desert. You know, it's a guy from San Diego or something.
Really?
And that's what gives it, you know, more expansiveness in a way.
No drugs, You know, this was not about expanded drug
Me neither.
experiences.
No, me neither.
Mm.
No, I understand. Go on.
You know, it's interesting when we met each other in the studio. We recognized each other. Interesting.
we probably were born in the same
Right,
place,
yeah.
the same hospital.
Same mold. Right. Well, these experiences threw me into an initiation crisis, which is very well known to the traditional tribal people of the world. Unfortunately, in our culture, we don't have wise, honored elders to turn to help guide us. I was very much on my own, and I had to find my own way.
In a particularly alien world.
Really?
Yeah,
really.
Right.
Now, fortunately for me, when I came back to California, I turned to a man, an anthropologist who I knew, named Michael Harner. Michael Harner, the director of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. And it was through Michael Harner's foundation that I was able to develop certain abilities within myself, which otherwise might have remained dormant for the rest of my life.
Because he had walked that path in a way.
He had walked that path. You see, if I've got this right, and I believe that I do, there's a program on our inner hard drive. The inner hard drive, like a computer. In our case, it's our DNA, our genetic code. And this program allows us to achieve expanded states of awareness. And there are lots of things that can double-click this program. You know, drugs can do it, drumming can do it, rattling can do it, dancing, music, that beautiful flute music. You know, I was sort of halfway
I
there.
always saw it as like a valve that opens, and the purpose on all the spiritual paths and what people want to do is keep the valve open, or at least be in control of opening and closing the valve.
Well,
and then the juices, you know, get that juice flowing.
If I've got this right, once the valve opens, it can completely alter the physical body as well as the central nervous system in as little as 15 minutes. You know, there is evidence now in science that the brain can essentially reorganize itself very quickly in response.
Well, I mean, I was saying to somebody today, don't they say that only 5 or 10% is even used? I mean, you got a vast wasteland, you know,
Right.
basically sitting around waiting. Are you going to do something with this?
Well, I discovered this program, and interestingly, for me it was the tantric which opened that doorway.
Right.
Now, a lot of my colleagues find that pretty funny today, you know, but let's face it,
Sure.
it's a great
Sure,
experience.
Hank. That was how it worked, huh, Hank?
Really,
No.
really. Well, my relationship with this man, Nainoa, who lives in the future, has become a very interesting one. And in his own life, in his own time, there's an extraordinary adventure, because when I first connected with him, he was in the process of leaving his community to go on a geographical quest into the lost continent of America,
Really?
looking for the survivors of our civilization state.
Wow, like a Planet of the Apes?
Listen, there's an extraordinary adventure written into these books.
Yeah, I know, it is amazing.
And he finds them. He finds them living on the western side of the Sierra Nevada mountains, interestingly. This man isn't living in Hawaii. He's living somewhere on the western coast of North America. But California of today looks very, very different. Rainforest, jaguars, the whole Central Valley is filled with water.
You mean when in 5,000 years
Yes,
from now?
it bears out greenhouse warming's worst case scenario, with a sea level rise of perhaps 200 to 300 feet, and a biome shift in which the tropics has literally marched north, and California is now in the tropic zone. Now, I can't prove that, but I feel very strongly that it's so.
And does it have to be, even if you know, consciousness can rearrange, in a way, the future?
That's a good question. You know, if I've got this right, and I believe that I do, I've had a look at the future, Alan. Now, people have asked me, all right, Hank, since you've had a look at the future, does that mean the future is cast in stone? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think there are probably limitless numbers of potential futures, and they may all be going on at once. But the future that we're going into, if we continue to do business as usual, is Nainoa's world. And so there's a very strange message in these books.
Yeah, Tom Hartman, actually, are you familiar with his work?
I am.
Yeah, Tom has been a guest on the show too, and I just received an email from him and, what's his wife's name? Louise, yeah, Louise. And, you know, he was saying, you know, are we going to run out of oil or something? You know, I mean, just that same kind of thing where, you know, we're cruising for a bruising. You know, we're cutting off the branch, we're sitting on, you know, all those. And so, in other words, that's the vision you see. But it's interesting because, you know, just from the position we have, that every 2 weeks or so, 25 times a year, extraordinary people come in from all over the world. with somebody like you who exploded, and one explosion after another, and that explosion is rippling.
Listen, there were days when I looked at the ceiling and said, "Why me, Lord?"
Yeah,
because it complicated my life considerably.
I'll bet you did.
When we go into the stage of initiation, this is a time of tests, trials, and tribulations.
You mean this time in human history?
Well, and my time in my life I'm
Right.
talking about.
But do you think see, I see it as just, it's like this time in your human history, and you're part of it, and I'm part of it, and it's that time when it's either we go into an ascending period, or we go into.
I do. When I was actually going through this in Hawaii, I went into a crisis though, and my life unraveled. I lost virtually everything except my wife and kids, and that was very touch and go there for a
Yeah, I
while.
can imagine.
I mean, what would you do if you're a wife with 2 small children and you're living in Hawaii with a man who's going crazy?
Or
who's letting
seemingly
everything
go
go?
crazy.
Really,
You're right.
really.
On earthly terms, has lost his marbles.
So really my first book is about my initiation crisis. The second book is about my recovery, and Visionseeker is about training. It's about my training in the shamanic tradition and Nainoa's training in the Kohona tradition.
What we'll do is we'll talk about the shamanic training and how it it applies. Maybe we'll do the second set now. So we're going to do Salo's second set with Mark, and they're going to do Egyptian Mischief and Alana's Awakening. So Salo and Mark. Thank you, Salo. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. So we're back on the set with Hank. So how do like the shamans in Hawaii, feel about you, Hallie, writing this book about all this stuff?
That's a very good question. When I wrote my first book, Spiritwalker, I was very much aware of the fact that I was trespassing. I was
Seemingly, if we have walls up and stuff like that. I mean.
Well, even as an anthropologist, I'm very sensitive to the fact that traditional people don't like it when outsiders, especially anthropologists, trespass into their sacred traditions.
Right.
So,
well, because the general result is trashing it in some way or another.
Well, I wasn't trashing anything.
No, I know.
I was writing.
No, I understand.
You see,
I mean, your intent was a lot different.
Yeah, and this stuff really was never written down. There's a lot of kahuna wisdom in my books. And so I knew that sooner or later, the Hawaiians were going to come to look me over. Well, in 1996, toward the end of the year, I was invited to speak at an institute in Hawaii called the New Millennium Institute. And there were about 50 folks who came in a big Frank Lloyd Wright house up in Waimea on the Big Island. And I'm just about to get my dock, and the door opens, and in walks this huge Hawaiian man. Great big ponytail down his back, great big beard down his front. And he's got 4 other Hawaiian men with him, and they've all got beards and ponytails, and they're bigger than I am. And I knew that the moment had come.
The confrontation was here, had arrived.
I knew.
Right.
So this man was introduced to me, and I'd heard about him for years. He's kind of like the Dalai Lama of the Pacific. I mean, everyone knows him. He's descended from Kamehameha on both sides of his family. This guy is a big kahuna.
He's a heavy dude, as they say.
He's a heavy dude.
Right.
So here I am. This is a very good time to have spirit helpers. So I breathe this prayer to my helping spirits. And he sits down with his pals, and they watch me like stones. They just sort of sit and look at me. So I launched into my talk, which was really about the spiritual reawakening which is going on in the West. It was about bridging heaven and earth, my talk. And at the end of that talk, I looked over at him and I said, "Honored Elder, would you care to say a few words?" I invited him to speak. And so he looked down and thought about it for a minute, and then he smiled and he nodded and he got up. He had this big spirit stick in front of him, big ko'o. He looked at me and he said, "A friend of mine sent me your book, and I read it." Then there's this long pause, and all 50 people kind of lean in. This was high noon in Hawaii. They lean in to see what's going to happen next.
When kahuna talks, people listen.
This kahuna looks at me and says, "I read it again just to make sure I got it right."
Wow.
And then I went down to the beach, and I took your book, and I put it down in the sand, and I called in the spirits of my ancestors, and we had a talk about you. He pauses again. Silence in the room. I'm bracing myself for the worst. He said, "The ancestors asked me what your name is." And I told him, his name is Wesselman. Then he smiles for the first time and he said, "The ancestors told me I wasn't pronouncing your name right." They said,
Probably I wasn't pronouncing it right either. That's what.
They said, "This is a vessel man."
Vessel.
Now my wife is not here to say this, so I'm saying this from a place of sharing, not from
No,
a
I
place of
understand.
ego. He said, "This man is a vessel."
No egos allowed on the show, so once you got here,
Yeah, he said, "This guy is like a vessel, like a canoe." And this kahuna's watching me to see if I'm getting it yet. And I'm slowly going into shock, you see.
That's great.
And, he looks at me and he says, "The ancestors have told me that you are one of the light carriers of Aloha.
Wow.
And you were born in a haole body this time for a reason."
Right.
Well, I'm just stunned.
Right.
Because, see, I'd been expecting him to condemn me, to say, "Look, you're not Hawaiian. Don't write about us. Stop writing."
A true master, somebody who really knows. I mean, the body is like, you're in a black shirt. I mean, it's almost like that. You know what I mean? We end up as humans seeing things like that. But the truth of it is, I mean, your physical form is no different than, that you're in a white shirt and a red shirt and a blue shirt and all that.
This kahuna looks at me and he says, "We Hawaiians don't write." I mean, he's very psychic. He just pulls this right out of my mind. He says, "We don't write. We talk, and we share what we find in our hearts with each other. But in your culture, it's the tradition to write." And so the ancestors have said, for me to say in front of all these people here, that everything you wrote in your books is true.
Wow.
And we Hawaiians support you.
Wow, that's
Keep
fantastic.
spreading the word.
Wow.
Man, I was stunned. I mean, this just doesn't happen.
That's fantastic.
Now this guy comes up to me then and says, "We should have a meeting before you leave the island." And this was the beginning of a most extraordinary relationship. In fact, this Hawaiian elder and I have become very close friends. He and his wife, me and my wife, we get together whenever we come to the islands. And we usually sit and talk for an entire day. This man is filling me with sacred knowledge, which has never been written down before.
And he wants you to share it.
Some of it can be shared on the breath, and some of it is shared in the workshops and gatherings that I do, the retreats that I do, especially the ones in Hawaii. And very often this man comes and visits us at these workshops.
Wow.
So this is really quite an honor to know somebody like this. So when you ask me how the Hawaiians reacted to my books, I feel very blessed in a way, because it could have gone otherwise.
As we know.
In fact...
if your intention is pure, I think that's a tremendous...
Yeah. Well, this guy looked me over and decided I was real.
Right.
In 1988, 98-99, the Institute of Noetic Sciences travel program invited me to lead a tour to Hawaii and New Zealand, which we did, my wife and I. And while we were on the North Island of New Zealand, we got to spend the night sleeping in an ancestral spirit house, an ancestral marae. And at that location, the Maori elders gifted us with a sacred object. They're aware of the work that we do, the healing work that we do. And for the Maori, the green stone, the jade, the nephrite jade, what they call ponamu, is their most sacred object. It's one of these very rare objects that looks the same in this level of reality and in the spirit world as well. This is the stone of peace and healing, ponamu. And this stone right here was used as a healing tool for 1,000 years by medicine makers. And so this stone was placed...
This particular one right here?
This particular one right here.
Wow,
so this stone now travels with me and with my wife. And when we do healing work in the workshops and retreats that we do, this stone inevitably comes into play. So, these things happen in life. And, I look back, on growing up in New York, and I think to myself, could I have predicted that this would happen? That I would explode, as you put it, in the middle of my life?
There's no way to know.
I never could have predicted this, even 15 years ago. If you'd asked me, gee, do you think you'll be on television someday talking to me in Santa Barbara?
Yeah, right.
I would have laughed.
What I say generally is there are a lot of breaths between here and there. We don't know. That's why you can live in every breath and give it your best shot with as much integrity as you can. And you have an intention. You had an intention when you got up this morning that somewhere in the end of the day you were going to be here.
Yes.
But there were a lot of breaths between here and there.
Indeed.
So, and that was my intention when I got up this morning. As it turned out, we made it through about, 50 minutes of the intention. Now whether,
Indeed.
Yeah,
well, these strange books that I've written, Visionseeker contains a great deal of sacred knowledge of the Hawaiian kahunas. And in fact, this meeting with this kahuna, I wrote about it in Visionseeker. It's in there. Mm-hmm. These books have drawn me into connection with the most interesting people. Because as I travel around, I teach at Esalen, I teach at Omega, I teach at Brighton Bush up in Oregon. I teach all over the place. And the vision seekers, the mystics, come in out of the woodwork. And they come in to have a look at me and see if I'm real. And, I'm being drawn into connection with these remarkable people. Mm-hmm. Your listeners are probably very much aware of the fact that another extraordinary book has come out by Paul Ray, The Cultural Creatives, how 50 million people are changing the world. Well, these 50 million people have a very interesting system of beliefs, values, and trends. These are people who believe in the existence of an alternate reality. They believe in the existence of spirits, those spirit helpers and spirit teachers that the traditional people know so much about. Mm-hmm. These are the people who believe in power, the underlying field of power that Obi-Wan called the Force, and that the Hawaiians call mana, and that the Bushmen call num. Remember the guys from The Gods Must Be Crazy? Well, this num is the most powerful thing in their universe. And it arrives the way it arrives in me as this vibrational force that boils in the head of the shaman. And they use this power to do healing work. I, as an anthropologist, had tapped into something rather ancient. Now, in talking about this with you, there's something else that's rather interesting that we could just briefly mention. A scientist at the University of Illinois at Chicago named Norman Dunn read my first book, and he wrote to me and he said, I think I know what you're doing. He then told me an interesting story about a French researcher who went to India in the 50s looking for a guru who could achieve the samadhi ecstasy at will, who would be willing to be wired with an EEG. Well, he found one. His hypothesis was that these gurus were going down into theta brainwave states. And it's well known that people vision in theta brainwave states that meditators go into. Very slow brainwave states between really 3 and 8 cycles per second. Right. Well, he discovered the guru was going in the other direction. He was going way out beyond beta into 40 hertz, 40 cycles per second brainwave states, with his brain generating terrific amplitude of power in these states. Well, he published it. This was a man named Henri Gaston. And this paper remained unchallenged for literally 40 years because, Western science didn't know what to do with it. We didn't have a model to fit this into, so they cited it, but they didn't know what to do with it. Well, this guy writes to me and he says, I think this is what you're doing. Would you be interested in running some tests? Now, this guy, Norman Dunn, was working in Brazil on an NIH grant, working with shamans, trance mediums, psychic healers, and he had topographic brain maps on over 100 subjects in trance states. He'd only been able to find 13 people who could achieve these 40 hertz brainwave states. Interestingly, all of them have had the alien abduction experience.
Wow.
When he wired me for sound, he said, all right, let's see you open this inner doorway of yours. And when I opened it, wham, my brainwaves went out to 40 hertz. Wow. And I was generating between 50 and 60 microvolts.
Do you remember any alien abductions?
That's a good question.
Oh, I've been a host for a few hours here.
The next day, his co-worker in Brazil, a woman named Gilda Moura, called me on her nickel from Brazil. And over the telephone, she was able to induce a deep state of hypnosis in me. And she extracted a very early memory out of my memory banks. This is also recorded in a chapter in Visionseeker.
Right.
In this experience, I'm this little baby in a crib, and I can't even stand up. I can't even turn over. I can piston my little arms and legs. Now, science says we can't remember that early. But most of what's in my book, science says is impossible anyway, so we'll just forget that.
Right.
I remember hearing a sound, a very high-pitched vibration, like cicadas singing in the summer, or a Tibetan bowl with a throb to it. And this sound began to get higher and higher and higher. And I remember looking around and I could see the bars of my crib, but the walls were white. And as the sound went higher, the light got brighter and brighter and brighter until the sound passed beyond the range of my hearing, and I had a complete whiteout, and I couldn't remember anything after that. Now, whether this classifies as an abduction experience, I don't know.
So that was as close as you came to remembering an
as far as I know,
experience.
I've had no connection with the Greys, the reptilians, the tall guys, and so forth.
But
and so
all
on.
the other 13 who had that 40 megahertz experience had, and knowingly had.
Yes, but you see, I've had connection with spirits.
Right, I understand. Yeah, there are a lot of ways to get home.
This brings up something very interesting about the aliens. Could they in fact be spirits who are connecting with us? And we've sort of put them into this classic alien mode because of Hollywood.
The unknown.
Yeah.
We're not so good with the unknown usually.
Yeah. I've talked this over with John Mack, who wrote the book on alien abductions and his second book, Passport to the Cosmos, which is excellent. And we have a lot to talk about, John and I. Yeah.
So when you're having these experiences, I mean, when I have those types of experiences, the only way I could describe it is it feels like love in a human body. Do you experience it that way?
Love.
Love. Bliss.
Bliss, rapture, ecstasy. It's strong.
And no division. There's no distinction. There's no division. There's no separation.
I discovered something that the traditional people know very well. That reality is made up of things that are seen and things that are hidden. In Western culture, we expect there to be a very clear division between them, between what's in the mind and what's in this room. But the traditional people know that what's seen and what's hidden are woven together into a single fabric, a seamless fabric, in which one merges into the other. And so...
Yeah, everything's connected.
Everything. And we're very much connected with it even as we speak right now. In fact,
can it be otherwise?
As you and I are sitting here talking on television, we're dreaming at the same time. But because our conscious awareness is
I'm hoping
focused
most
here.
of the audience is up, but I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
We do put a lot of people to sleep into meditation.
Right.
People get relaxed so much during the meditation that I've heard that people don't hear the rest of the show. They go into a whiteout.
I have this experience at conferences when somebody like Norman Shealy, the doctor, will be talking. Norman's a fabulous medicine man, but every time he talks, he puts me into a deep trance state.
Exactly.
And I have to sort of recover it afterwards, sort of like recover.
No, yeah, right. I mean, it's all there.
Yeah.
Because it's happening and we're there. And it's
Really?
because we think of it as words, but it's actually vibrational. And we're getting it. We're
Yeah.
there. So,
Yeah.
I think we've done it again. The show's over. Really, it's amazing. So, again, it's another opportunity. I mean, you've heard the songs, you've heard the stories, and basically you've seen people's ability to describe the way they exploded, the way their love came out, the way their bliss became known. And it's just an opportunity for us all. So if you want any information about the books, about the CDs, it's Alan, 805-687-2053. It's an opportunity. Again, let me say it's an opportunity for us all to know that truth, to be in that truth, and to connect and use our grace to share that love. So good night. God bless you. Thank you.